I'm Victoria, 30 years old, and a first-generation American. That warm summer evening was supposed to be a celebration, but instead, it became the night everything between my parents and me changed forever. After years of trying to please them, of shrinking myself to fit their expectations, one cruel comment at the dinner table finally shattered the fragile peace. When they said they wished I had never been born, something inside me broke, and for the first time, I stood tall, found my voice, and spoke words that froze the entire room. Before I share how that dinner transformed my life completely, let me know where you're watching from. And if you want more stories about finding your voice when everyone expects your silence, subscribe. My parents arrived in America with nothing but 2 suitcases and enormous dreams. My father, Carlos, came from Mexico at 19. My mother, Alice, followed a year later. They met while working double shifts at the same restaurant in Arizona, saving every penny for what they believed was the true American dream, a better future for their children. To them, success meant becoming a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. Anything less was failure. By the time I was born, they had built a modest but steady life. My brother Gabriel came 2 years before me, and from the very beginning, the expectations were crystal clear. If excellence wasn't encouraged, it was demanded. A B was treated like failure. Achievements were never celebrated, only acknowledged. As the bare minimum. You got an A in math? Good. Next time, study harder for spelling, my mother would say without even looking up from the stove. Some of my earliest memories are of sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by workbooks, while other kids played outside. My parents had designed their own after-school curriculum. Gabriel thrived under the pressure, glowing with their approval. I struggled, not with the work itself, but with the crushing feeling that nothing I did would ever be enough. In 3rd grade, I won first place in the school science fair with a project on butterfly metamorphosis. My teacher was so proud she even got it featured in the local newspaper. When I rushed home with the article, my father glanced at it and said, "Science is good. Focus on this instead of wasting time drawing in your notebooks." That was their way. Every success was just another stepping stone to the next demand, never something to pause and celebrate. Gabriel, the golden child, was everything they wanted, brilliant in math and science, perfectly aligned with their version of the American dream. When he brought home straight A's, they nodded in approval. When I did, they asked why my conduct marks weren't as high. Gabriel sits still and listens. "Why do your teachers say you talk too much?" my mother would ask, comparing us openly. By middle school, I had internalized their expectations so deeply that I became my own harshest critic. I stayed up late studying, joined every academic club, and pushed myself to exhaustion trying to earn approval that never came. I developed severe test anxiety, sometimes making myself physically ill before exams, even though I always performed well. The first major break came during my sophomore year of high school. My art teacher, Miss Sullivan, saw something in my drawings and encouraged me to apply to a prestigious summer art program. When I got in with a scholarship, I was ecstatic. For the first time, I felt recognized for something I truly loved. At dinner, I shared the news. My father put down his fork, looked at me, and said, "Art? What good is art? This is a distraction. You're not going." I tried to explain that the program would strengthen my college applications, that many graduates went on to top universities. My mother shook her head. "College is for medicine or law, not drawing pictures. Gabriel is already preparing for pre-med. Why must you always be different?" That night, I cried quietly in my room, realizing for the first time that my happiness and my parents' approval might be 2 entirely separate paths. Still, I went to the summer program, lying that it was an academic camp. The guilt was heavy, but those 6 weeks were the most transformative of my young life. When it came time for college applications, I applied to both pre-med and design schools. The acceptance letters poured in, including one from the Rhode Island School of Design with a generous scholarship. Choosing meant breaking something sacred. My parents had already left space on the wall for my future medical degree. When I told them I had chosen graphic design, the disappointment was crushing. "We didn't come to this country for you to waste your potential," my father said, pushing away from the dinner table. For 3 weeks, my mother barely spoke to me. Gabriel, excelling in pre-med, became the sole focus of their pride. When I left for college that fall, my father drove me silently to the airport. His only parting words were a stiff hug and, "At least graduate with honors, since you chose this path." And I did. Throughout college, I thrived. I made the dean's list every semester, won design competitions, and landed prestigious internships. But every time I called home to share the news, the response was always the same, distant, hollow. As if no matter what I accomplished, it would never be enough. "That is nice, but when will you apply to graduate school for something serious?" The years of conditional love and impossible standards left me with crippling anxiety and perfectionism that followed me well into adulthood. Every project, every deadline, every relationship carried the same fear: if I wasn't perfect, I was nothing. The idea of simply being enough felt impossible. After graduating summa cum laude from design school, I turned down a safe job in Arizona near my parents and instead chose a risky but exciting entry-level role at a boutique agency in New York. Their reaction was predictable disappointment, but I was determined to finally live on my own terms. Those first years in New York were a mix of exhilarating freedom and punishing work schedules. My tiny Brooklyn apartment could barely fit a bed and a desk, but it was mine. I worked 60-hour weeks, taking on weekend freelance jobs just to make rent and grow my portfolio. Every call home eventually turned into the same question: when would I get serious about my future? My mother would casually remind me that my cousin Anna had just started her medical residency and already bought a house. I never told them about the ramen dinners or the nights I cried from exhaustion. I also didn't share the small victories, the clients who loved my work, or the growing confidence I was finding in myself. They wouldn't have understood. Everything shifted when I met Jennifer, a creative director who discovered my portfolio at a design conference. She was accomplished, unapologetic about her choices, and unlike anyone I'd ever known. The first time she praised my work without adding a critique, I nearly cried. "You have a unique perspective, Victoria," she told me over coffee. "Stop chasing perfection. Start chasing authenticity." For the first time, I had a mentor who celebrated my wins without conditions. She pushed me to take risks, introduced me to her network, and reminded me that mistakes weren't failures, they were lessons. "Failure is data," she'd say. "Collect it, and move forward." It was at one of Jennifer's dinner parties that I met David, a writer who saw the world in words the way I saw it in images. Our connection was instant, deep. For the first time, I felt fully seen and accepted. As I shared stories from my childhood, David grew quiet. "Victoria, that's not high expectations," he said gently after one memory. "That's emotional abuse." At first, I dismissed his concern, insisting my parents were just strict but well-meaning. But as our relationship deepened and I finally began therapy, I started to see my family through his eyes. When David and I decided to move in together, my parents' reaction was devastating. My mother cried on the phone, saying I was bringing shame to the family. My father sent a long email listing every sacrifice they had made, accusing me of disrespect. Despite the tension, my career was thriving. At 27, I won a major industry award for a non-profit campaign I had designed. The project was featured in multiple design publications, and I was invited to speak at conferences. Jennifer threw a surprise celebration, and David gave me a card filled with love and pride. When I shared the news with my parents, their response was cold: "That's nice, but you know it's just drawing pictures. Gabriel just published his first medical research paper." That night, something broke between David and me. He couldn't understand why I still longed for approval from people who seemed incapable of giving it. "Why do you keep going back for more hurt?" he asked, frustrated by my tears. "At some point, you have to protect yourself." His words cut deep, but I wasn't ready to let go. The strain between us grew, and so did my anxiety. I felt trapped between the love I had with David and the approval I still craved from my parents. Eventually, our break became permanent. Another dream lost on the altar of family expectations. The separation left me hollow, and pushed me into a depression I couldn't ignore. I finally committed to weekly therapy sessions, where I began unpacking the patterns of emotional abuse that had shaped my life. My therapist, Dr. Richardson, helped me see that my parents' love had always been conditional, based on achievement rather than simply existing as their child. "A child should never have to earn a parent's love," she reminded me during one particularly difficult session. It was a truth that turned everything I thought I knew about family upside down. Over the next 2 years, I worked hard at setting boundaries with my parents. At first, I cut phone calls down to once a week, then once every 2 weeks. I stopped sharing details about my career that might invite criticism. I practiced not arguing when they made dismissive comments, just acknowledging their opinion and moving on. Instead of defending myself, I learned to use phrases like, "I'll consider that," or, "That's one way to see it." The distance made me stronger, but the wound never fully healed. Every interaction left me drained, torn between wanting their approval and desperately trying to free myself from needing it. It was like walking a tightrope, balancing the desire to maintain some family connection while protecting my fragile sense of self-worth. By the time I turned 30, I had built a successful career, a fulfilling social life, and healthier relationships. Yet, conversations with my parents still filled me with anxiety. I had learned to manage the relationship, but not to heal from its broken foundation. So, when an embossed invitation to my parents' 35th wedding anniversary arrived, that familiar knot formed in my stomach. 3 years had passed since I had spent more than a brief Christmas visit at home. Our relationship had settled into a distant civility, but the thought of a full family gathering filled me with dread. I carried the invitation into my next session with Dr. Richardson. After listening to my endless list of reasons for and against attending, she asked simply, "What do you want to do?" "I want to be the kind of daughter who can celebrate her parents' marriage without feeling anxious," I admitted. "I just want to be normal." "Normal is relative," she said with a gentle smile. "But if you decide to go, let's work on boundaries that will keep you safe." Together, we came up with strategies. I would stay at a hotel instead of their house. Limit the trip to 2 days instead of the full week my mother wanted. Prepare neutral topics of conversation. Plan exit strategies for awkward moments. And most importantly, I would ground myself in my own worth, no matter what was said. "Remember," Dr. Richardson reminded me as our session ended, "you are choosing to attend as an adult. You have the power to engage or disengage at any moment." In the weeks leading up to the trip, I obsessed over the perfect anniversary gift. I finally commissioned a handmade silver photo frame from an artisan I knew and had it engraved with their wedding date and the words, 35 years of family. It cost nearly $1,000, far more than I could really afford, but I felt it was necessary to avoid criticism. I spent almost as much energy choosing my outfit. Nothing flashy or creative that might invite comments about my artistic temperament. Nothing too casual that could be seen as careless. Nothing too formal that might look like I was trying too hard. In the end, I chose a conservative navy blue dress that covered my 2 small tattoos and looked professional without being showy. When my flight landed in Arizona, the desert heat hit me like a physical reminder of everything I had left behind. I picked up my rental car, checked into my hotel, and spent 30 minutes touching up my makeup and hair before driving to my parents' house. With each mile, I repeated my therapist's advice: stay present. Remember your boundaries. You are an adult visiting other adults. My mother's critical eye struck the moment she opened the door. "Esperanza, you look tired. You've lost weight. Are you eating?" No hello. No hug. Just evaluation. My father was more restrained, offering a stiff embrace before retreating back to the television as I joined my mother in the kitchen. Within minutes, she had already mentioned my brother Gabriel 3 times, his prestigious research position, his wife Bella's pregnancy. "Your brother will make us grandparents by Christmas," she said pointedly. "At your age, I already had. Both of you." I took a deep breath and leaned on one of my practiced responses. "I'm happy for Gabriel and Bella." "That's wonderful news." Their modest home had been transformed for the party, living room furniture pushed aside for extra chairs, the dining table extended with rentals to seat 16 guests. My mother had spent days preparing traditional Mexican dishes alongside American favorites to please everyone. By 6 o'clock, the house was full of relatives. Tia Claudia and Tio Miguel arrived first with their 3 children, all with impressive careers my mother highlighted during introductions. Alice, a pharmacist. Antonio, finishing law school. Carmen, already accepted into a doctoral program at 23. And Esperanza, she designs ads in New York, she added, with far less enthusiasm. Then came my father's siblings, including my favorite Aunt Teresa, who always showed me real warmth. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "I saw your work for that big cosmetics campaign. It was beautiful." Her quiet kindness nearly brought me to tears. As the house filled and the noise rose, so did my anxiety. Each conversation seemed to circle back to the same questions. Still working in graphic design? Not married yet? No children on the horizon? I had just escaped an awkward exchange with my cousin Javier about freezing my eggs, before it's too late, when Gabriel and Bella walked into universal admiration. My mother practically glowed as she guided Bella, radiant and visibly pregnant, to the most comfortable chair in the living room. Gabriel, sharp in his tailored suit, moved easily through the crowd, carrying himself with the natural confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the family hierarchy. To my surprise, when he reached me, his hug felt genuine, almost tender. "I've missed you, little sister," he said warmly, holding me at arm's length. "New York must agree with you. You look wonderful." For just a moment, I caught a glimpse of the brother I had loved as a child, before expectations and comparisons pushed us down separate roads. But the moment slipped away quickly, interrupted by my mother's call for everyone to take their seats at the dinner table. The arrangement spoke volumes. My parents at either end. Gabriel and Bella seated in places of honor near my father. And me, tucked between elderly Tio Ramon, who could barely hear, and teenage cousin Sophia, who spent most of dinner hidden behind her phone. As platters of food passed around the table, I felt myself tightening like a spring, hyper-aware of every glance, every word that might hide criticism. I sat tall, carefully monitored my manners, measured every bite of food, all while forcing a pleasant smile that made my cheeks ache. The anniversary celebration had only just begun, and I was already drained from the performance. The dining room glowed beneath the antique chandelier my father had restored years ago. Crystal glasses caught the light beside delicate china my mother reserved only for special occasions. The table was a mirror of my parents' lives, elegant, polished, but fragile, as though one wrong move could shatter everything. My father rose for the first toast. Crystal glass raised high, he smiled at my mother. 35 years ago, I married the most beautiful, hardworking woman in Arizona. Together we built a life, a home, and raised children who make us proud. His gaze shifted to Gabriel. Our son, the doctor, carrying on the legacy of medicine's great minds. Soon to make us grandparents, and to continue our family story. I waited for even the smallest mention of me. A nod. A single word of recognition. It never came. He ended the toast with more praise for my mother and sat down to murmurs of approval. I had expected the slight, but somehow the sting cut deeper in the open glow of family pride. I took a long sip of wine, focusing on slicing my chicken into even, perfect pieces. As the meal went on, my mother steered the conversation like a conductor. Finally, her attention turned toward me. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Esperanza, tell everyone about your work. Still with that little company? Or have you found something more established? The phrasing was deliberate. Little company. More established. Not successful. Not meaningful. Just temporary, actually, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was promoted to senior design director last month. My team just won a national award for our campaign with the American Heart Association. For a heartbeat, I allowed myself the hope of approval. Recognition. Pride, that's nice, my mother replied, her tone flat. But is there room for advancement? What's the next step toward a real career? The words hit like a stone. A real career. As if a decade of dedication and achievement were just a hobby, a placeholder until I grew up. Design is my real career, I said, my voice firmer than intended. And I am very successful at it. My father set his fork down with a sharp clink against the china. Successful is a relative term, Esperanza. Your brother saves lives. That is meaningful work. Heat rose in my face, but I forced myself to remain calm. Meaning takes many forms. The campaign we created will encourage thousands of women to get preventative heart screenings. That matters too. Sensing the tension, my Aunt Claudia quickly chimed in. Speaking of successful careers, our Antonio just received 2 job offers. From top law firms. Full benefits. 6-figure starting salary. She beamed at her son, who looked politely embarrassed. That, my mother added pointedly, is the kind of stability parents hope for. Security. Respect. A clear path forward. I took a breath and tried another approach. The creative industry has transformed dramatically. Did you know that major corporations now treat design thinking as a core business strategy? Apple has shown the world that design doesn't just inspire, it drives both innovation and profit. My father waved his hand dismissively. Companies will always need doctors, lawyers, engineers. These artistic fads come and go. I felt the conversation slipping away, my professional identity shrinking with every exchange. Desperate to change the subject, I turned to my mom. The food is amazing, Mom. You outdid yourself with the chili rellenos. But she wasn't ready to let go. I ran into Sofia Martinez last week, she said, naming my childhood friend. Her daughter's your age. Just finished her residency in pediatric neurology. Married a doctor, too. The comparison lingered like a shadow. I nodded and forced another bite of food, though it now tasted like cardboard. My Uncle Miguel leaned forward. You know, I have a friend with a son about your age. Very handsome, very successful. He's an architect. I could introduce you. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in eagerly. That would be wonderful. Esperanza needs to think about settling down soon. 30 is not young anymore. The conversation spiraled, suddenly focused on my romantic prospects as if I weren't even there. My aunts and uncles exchanged names of eligible men, while my mother lamented my supposed pickiness and unconventional priorities. I felt myself sinking into my chair, smaller and smaller with every word. Gabriel tried to rescue me, asking about my recent work trip to California. But my father cut in. What Esperanza really needs is to move back to Arizona. Family is everything. All this chasing trends in New York, designing ads that nobody remembers a week later, what's the point? His dismissal landed like a punch, but I kept my composure. I've built a life I love in New York. My work is challenging and fulfilling. My father shook his head. Fulfilling is raising a family, building something that lasts. Not these temporary projects. Carlos, my Aunt Teresa said softly, everyone finds fulfillment differently. But my father's voice rose with conviction. No. Some choices are objectively better. Some paths lead to real contribution. Others are just self-indulgent. The table went silent. I stared at my plate, fighting back tears, willing myself not to let his words break me. Sensing the tension, my mother tried to soften the blow. What your father means is, we just want security for you. We sacrificed so much to give you opportunities. And sometimes we worry you're wasting your potential. That phrase, wasting your potential, the dagger that had haunted me since childhood. The quiet judgment that had pierced my heart for decades. I am not wasting anything, I said softly. I'm using my talents in ways that matter to me. My father pushed his chair back, a familiar warning of his rising anger. If you had become a doctor, like your brother, you would understand what real impact looks like. Sometimes I think we've spent too much time celebrating Gabriel and not enough on correcting your path. The room froze. My mother placed a hand on his arm, but he continued, his voice heavy with disappointment carried over decades. Sometimes we wish you had never been born. Then we wouldn't have to watch so much potential go to waste. The words dropped like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock around the table. My cousin Sophia gasped aloud. My Aunt Teresa covered her mouth with trembling hands. Bella, Gabriel's wife, rested her hand protectively over her pregnant belly, as if shielding her unborn child from such cruelty. Time seemed to freeze. In that suspended moment, everything became painfully clear, the pattern of my life, the so-called love that had always been conditional, never real. A strange calm washed over me, the kind that arrives when the disaster you feared for years finally happens, leaving nothing left to dread. I set my napkin carefully on the table and stood, my chair scraping loudly against the silence. When I spoke, my voice was steady and unmistakably clear, carrying through every corner of the hushed room. Perfect. Then you will not need me when you are old. The silence grew heavier. My father's face shifted from shock to anger. My mother clutched the necklace she always wore, her hand trembling. Around the table, relatives sat frozen, bearing witness to a fracture that had been decades in the making. No one moved. No one spoke. The air felt carved in stone, the moment irreversible. My father recovered first, his face reddening with rage. How dare you speak to us this way, after everything we've done for you? This disrespect, in our home, on our anniversary. My mother jumped in quickly, her instincts for damage control taking over. Esperanza didn't mean it. Everyone knows how sensitive she's always been. Carlos was just joking earlier, of course, just joking. The familiar rewriting of cruelty, disguised as humor, after the harm was already done. No, I said firmly, still standing. He wasn't joking. And neither was I. The room stiffened again, silverware suspended midair, wine glasses halted between table and lips. My extended family sat captive, unwilling participants in the unraveling of our carefully maintained facade. To my surprise, Gabriel rose next. His voice steady, his eyes locked on our father. Dad, what you said was completely out of line. You cannot tell your own daughter you wish she'd never been born and expect her to just accept it. My mother gasped, wounded by this unexpected defiance from her golden child. Gabriel, please. This is not the time or place. When is the time, Mom? Gabriel pressed. You and Dad have been dismissing Esperanza for years. I've watched it happen. And I stayed silent. But that ends tonight. Aunt Teresa stood then, her voice gentle but firm. Carlos, Alice. Perhaps we should all take a moment to breathe. Family disagreements happen, but some words cannot be taken back. My father, unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by Gabriel, stared in disbelief. This is between us and our daughter. The rest of you should stay out of it. I felt oddly detached, as if floating above the scene, watching it unfold. Years of therapy had unknowingly prepared me for this moment. I picked up my purse from the back of my chair. Thank you all for coming to celebrate my parents' anniversary. But I think it's best if I leave now. My mother rose quickly, panic flashing in her eyes at the public spectacle. Esperanza, don't be dramatic. Sit down and finish dinner. We can talk later. There is nothing left to discuss, I answered calmly. Dad finally said out loud what I've always felt. At least now, there's honesty between us. I walked slowly around the table, past the frozen faces of relatives who had just witnessed my parents' true feelings exposed. No one reached out. No one stopped me. At the doorway, I turned back briefly. Gabriel met my eyes and gave me a small, steady nod of support. Outside, the desert night air met me with a cool, cleansing touch. I walked to my rental car with surprising steadiness, my hands calm as I unlocked the door. Only after driving 2 blocks did the tears blur my vision. I pulled into an empty church parking lot, turned off the engine, and finally let the flood of emotion break through. 30 years of trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. 30 years of measuring myself against impossible standards. 30 years of never being enough, and yet, beneath the pain, something unexpected stirred: relief. The pretense was over. The worst had happened. And I had survived. More than survived, I had stood my ground. As I sat in the darkened car, my phone buzzed with messages. The first was from my cousin Antonio: "What your dad said was horrible. You didn't deserve that." Then from Aunt Teresa: "I'm so sorry, Querida. Call me if you need to talk." 3 missed calls from my mother, but no voicemail, and then, most surprising of all, a text from Gabriel: "Can I come see you? Where are you staying?" I hesitated, uncertain if I wanted company, but moved by his unexpected alliance. I sent him the name of my hotel. Less than an hour later, a knock at my door. Gabriel stood there, tie loosened, looking more shaken than I'd seen him in years. His first words: "I should have spoken up years ago. I watched them chip away at you bit by bit, and I said nothing, because it was easier when their focus was on you." We talked long into the night, unraveling the tangled dynamics that had shaped our family. Gabriel admitted that his perfect compliance had been its own kind of prison. He admitted that he had chosen medicine partly because he cared about it, but mostly out of fear of disappointing our parents. "The difference between us," he said, "is that you had the courage to follow your own path, no matter the cost. I never did." As the night stretched on, he asked the very question I had been turning over since walking out of that dinner party: "What happens now?" "I don't know," I answered truthfully. "But for the first time, it feels like my choice to make." When Gabriel left, promising to check in the next day, I felt a strange blend of grief and freedom more powerfully than ever. Something at that dinner table had broken beyond repair. But something else, something vital in me, had finally been set free. That night, in the quiet of my hotel room, I slept more peacefully than I had in years. The first week back in New York was a blur of emotions. I even called in sick for 2 days, something I had never done before, just to sit with the weight of everything that had happened. My phone showed a dozen missed calls from my mother, but not one from my father. I couldn't bring myself to listen to her voicemails yet. Back at work, Jennifer quickly noticed my distraction and invited me into her office one evening. Without meaning to, I poured out the entire story, words tumbling out in a rush I couldn't stop. Instead of the awkward sympathy I expected, she surprised me by sharing her own story of family estrangement. "Family isn't always the people you're born to," she said gently, pouring us each a small glass of whiskey from her desk drawer. "Sometimes family is the people you choose, the ones who see your worth without demanding you prove it over and over." Her words stayed with me as I began navigating this unfamiliar truth. For years, I had clung to the image of a strict but supportive family. Now, I started telling the real story, first to close friends, then to my therapist, and slowly, to a wider circle. "You're allowed to limit contact with people who hurt you, even if they're your parents," Dr. Richardson reminded me. In one intense session. "That isn't selfish or ungrateful. It's survival." By the 3rd week, I still hadn't spoken directly to either of my parents, though I finally forced myself to listen to my mother's messages. They were predictable: first, demands that I apologize, then attempts to downplay the scene, and finally guilt over how I had ruined their special day. Not once did she acknowledge or apologize for my father's cruel words. Gabriel called often, becoming an unexpected source of comfort. He told me our parents were telling relatives I had overreacted to a small joke, casting themselves as victims of my sensitivity. "They really don't see it," he said, bewildered. "They honestly believe they've done nothing wrong." A month after that dinner, I made a decision that even surprised me. I deleted my parents' contact information, not blocking them, but removing their numbers so I wouldn't be tempted to call in moments of weakness. It was a small action that felt like a massive release. At work, something began to shift. Without the constant pressure to win my parents' approval, I started taking more risks, speaking up more boldly, and choosing projects that mattered to me, not just ones that would impress others. Jennifer noticed almost immediately: "Whatever personal battle you're fighting, it's making you a stronger designer," she told me. "Your work has always been excellent, but now it has heart." I began to build the chosen family Jennifer had spoken of, deepening bonds with friends who valued me just as I was. Sunday dinners at my apartment became a tradition, filling my home with warmth and laughter. My friend Zoe, a photographer who had also left behind a toxic family, became especially close. With her, I found the sisterly relationship I had never known. Slowly, the wall I had built between my personal pain and my professional life began to crumble. At a design conference, I gave a presentation on finding an authentic voice in creative work, weaving in pieces of my own journey, without ever mentioning my family directly. The response floored me. People lined up afterward, eager to share similar stories. "You put words to something I've felt my entire career," one young designer told me, tears in her eyes. Nearly 3 months after that dinner, Gabriel called with news that shook me. Dad had a minor heart attack yesterday. He's stable, but Mom insists you come home immediately. The old me would have rushed onto the first flight, desperate to prove my worth by being the dutiful daughter. But this time, I asked measured questions. Was he in immediate danger? No. Was Gabriel there? Yes. Tell Mom I'm glad he's recovering, I said at last. I'll send a card. Gabriel's silence told me everything. We both knew this marked a seismic shift. I was no longer the person who dropped everything at the first hint of guilt or crisis. The next day, my mother called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered without thinking. How can you be so selfish? She snapped. Your father is in the hospital, and all you send is a card? What kind of daughter are you? The familiar guilt rose in my chest, but this time, something stronger rose with it. Resolve. Mom, I'm sorry Dad is unwell. But I won't come to Arizona just to be blamed and criticized while pretending to help. That pattern is over. Pattern? What pattern? We've given you everything, and this is how you repay us? By abandoning your father when he needs you. He has excellent medical care, and he has you and Gabriel. He doesn't need someone he said he wishes had never been born. I heard her sharp intake of breath. He didn't mean that. You know how your father speaks without thinking. He meant it, Mom. And the problem isn't just that he said it, it's that both of you have shown me that your love is conditional. I deserve more than that. When the call ended, I expected to feel shame or anxiety. Instead, I felt clear. For the first time, I had spoken my truth, without apology, without excuses. 6 months after the dinner, an invitation arrived, Gabriel's baby shower. Inside was a handwritten note. Bella and I want you there. But we understand if it's too hard. Our parents will be at the main event, but we've arranged a separate celebration the day before if you'd prefer. That simple gesture, that my brother had acknowledged the reality instead of forcing me to pretend, moved me more deeply than I could put into words. I chose to attend a separate celebration, a decision that felt like finally choosing myself while still honoring the connections that mattered. That small victory opened the door to others. I began setting firm boundaries in every part of my life, from declining work projects that drained me, to ending relationships where I recognized unhealthy patterns. I stopped apologizing for my success, my choices, and even my existence. Nearly 9 months after that dinner, my father called. At first, I almost ignored it. But curiosity won. Victoria, he said, his voice sounding older than I remembered. Your mother thinks I should speak with you. Not an apology. Not even a hint that anything needed to be addressed. But it was the first time he had initiated contact. I'm listening, I replied, keeping my voice steady. The thing said at the dinner. I was frustrated. You've always been stubborn, always determined to do things your way. I stayed silent, giving him room, waiting to see if an apology would come. The pause stretched painfully. Gabriel says you're doing well in New York, he finally added, changing the subject. I am, I confirmed, offering nothing more. Another pause. Your mother would like you to visit for Christmas. I'm not ready for that, I said honestly. But, thank you for calling, Dad. It was a brief, awkward conversation that resolved nothing, yet it marked a shift. He had reached out, imperfectly, but still. And I had held my boundaries without anger. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement. Our relationship had changed. By the 1-year anniversary of that dinner, I had found a new rhythm in life that put my well-being first. I spoke with Gabriel weekly, exchanged short emails with my mother, and had 2 more hesitant phone calls with my father. When I finally agreed to a video call with both parents to meet Gabriel's new baby, my therapist helped me prepare. You are not responsible for their emotions or reactions. You can end the call if it becomes unhealthy. The call was tense but civil. My parents gushed over the baby while I observed from a careful emotional distance. When my mother made a pointed comment about how becoming a grandmother was the greatest joy in life, I simply smiled and changed the subject. During this period, I received the most unexpected recognition of my career, a nomination for Designer of the Year from a prestigious industry organization. The ceremony would be in Los Angeles, and nominees were encouraged to bring family. After much thought, I invited Jennifer, Zoe, and 2 close friends, the people who had supported me through everything. My chosen family. I did not invite my parents. That choice wasn't revenge. It was self-care. The night I won the award, standing on stage, I looked out at a sea of faces, colleagues, friends, my chosen family cheering from the front row. In that moment, I felt a circle complete. The validation I had spent decades craving from my parents had come instead from my own dedication and from the community I had built. I no longer needed them to see my worth in order to believe in it myself. A year and 3 months after the dinner that changed everything, I sat across from my parents in a quiet restaurant halfway between the airport and their home. I had agreed to a short visit with strict conditions: no criticism of my career, no comments about my personal life, and, most importantly, an acknowledgement of the hurt caused that night. My father, looking older than before, cleared his throat. As the appetizers arrived, "Your mother and I have been talking, with Gabriel, and with our priest," he began, clearly struggling. "What I said at the dinner, it was wrong. I should never have said we wished you were never born." It wasn't a full apology, not an admission of the years of conditional love, but it was more than I had expected. "Thank you for saying that," I replied softly. My mother reached across the table, then stopped when she saw me tense. "We don't always understand your choices, Victoria. But you are our daughter. Of course, we want you in this world." The conversation that followed was uneasy but different. They asked about my work, and listened. I shared a little, not seeking approval this time. When my mother began, "Have you considered," my father interrupted gently, "Alice, remember what we discussed?" It was clear they were trying, in their own limited way, to shift the dynamic. Not perfectly, not enough to heal everything, but enough to matter. As we stood to leave, my father asked the question that showed how far we still had to go: "So, everything can go back to normal now? You'll visit more often?" "Dad," I said carefully, "we're building a new normal. I'll visit sometimes, but my life is in New York. I need you both to continue respecting the boundaries we've agreed on." His face showed disappointment, but not the anger I once expected. That was progress. In the months that followed, I kept contact limited but civil: holiday cards, the occasional phone call, a brief visit once or twice a year. The relationship would never look like the picture society paints of family. But it had become something honest. My mother still slipped into old patterns, reminding me of my biological clock or comparing me to more traditional paths. But instead of carrying those words like proof of my inadequacy, I finally understood: they were reflections of her own fears and limitations. Not of me. "Your parents may never fully change," Dr. Richardson reminded me during a therapy session. "The real question is whether you can accept that truth while protecting your own well-being." I was learning that resolution didn't always mean perfect reconciliation. Sometimes it meant accepting the limits of certain relationships, while refusing to let those limits define my worth. Meanwhile, my career was thriving. The award I had won opened new doors, allowing me to work on projects with deeper social impact, the kind of work that fulfilled me most. I also began mentoring younger designers, especially those from immigrant families wrestling with cultural expectations that clashed with their creative dreams. One young woman, Alice, tearfully confided that her parents had threatened to cut her off if she pursued design instead of business. "How did you find the courage to disappoint your family?" she asked me. I told her, "The pain of disappointing your family is real, but the pain of abandoning yourself is far worse, and it lasts much longer." I had learned that living only to please others means never truly living at all. On a personal level, I had started a relationship with Michael, a kind, thoughtful architect who also came from a complicated family. He understood my boundaries around holidays and never pressured me to force a closeness with my parents I wasn't ready for. "Family is who treats you like family," he once said, echoing the wisdom Jennifer had shared with me years earlier. 2 years after the infamous dinner incident, Gabriel and Bella asked me to be godmother to their second child. The baptism meant another family gathering, another chance for old wounds to resurface. But it was also an opportunity to strengthen the new bonds I was building, especially with my brother. "Mom and Dad know this is your decision," Gabriel assured me. "And they've promised to respect whatever boundaries you set." I agreed to attend, clearly stating what I was and wasn't comfortable with. The ceremony itself was surprisingly peaceful. My parents, perhaps mindful of the extended family watching after the anniversary dinner debacle, kept their interactions polite, even warm. My mother even complimented my dress, without adding suggestions or criticism. At the reception, my father approached me quietly, looking more hesitant than I'd ever seen him. "Your brother tells me your company won some major accounts," he said. "Yes," I replied, bracing for the usual criticism, but instead, he nodded. "He showed me your campaign for the Children's Hospital. It was very good. Very professional." Coming from my father, those simple words felt like high praise. "Thank you, Dad," I said, genuinely touched. We stood in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "I may not understand your world, Esperanza, but I can see you've built something meaningful." It wasn't a sweeping declaration of unconditional love. But it was recognition, small, yet real. And in that moment, I realized I no longer needed more than this. I had already found my worth, in my work, in my friendships, and in the love I had cultivated. 3 years after that painful dinner, my life was full of meaning and connection. The wound had scarred over, no longer raw, just a reminder of how far I had come. I had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop trying to earn love that should be freely given, and instead build a life surrounded by people who love you exactly as you are. The journey from that dining room to this place of peace wasn't simple. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and days when old patterns tried to pull me back. But with each boundary held, each authentic choice honored, I moved further from the person who once shrank herself to fit others' expectations. Family, I discovered, isn't just defined by DNA or obligation. Family is love, respect, and acceptance. Sometimes it includes those we're born to, and sometimes it's the family we create. The table I sit at now may look different from the one I left behind that night, but it's filled with real affection, not conditions or criticism. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to diminish your choices? How did you find the courage to speak your truth? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. If this story resonates with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that they are worthy of unconditional love. Thank you for listening to my journey, from seeking approval to finding my authentic voice. Remember, sometimes the most powerful words you can say are simply, I deserve better.